a 32-year-old single mother living in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood in Burlington, Vermont, in 2023. The small town was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked until a string of break-ins changed everything. Over the past few months, neighbors had reported stolen tools, bicycles, and even attempts to enter homes in the dead of night. Carla, who lived alone with her 5-year-old daughter Lily, decided to install a basic security camera in her backyard. It was a simple model, connected to an app on her phone that sent motion alerts, giving her peace of mind as she tucked Lily into bed each night. But one cold November night, around 2 a.m., that sense of security shattered. Carla was in a deep sleep, exhausted from a long day of work and parenting, when her phone buzzed insistently on her nightstand. Groggy, she reached for it, squinting at the bright screen. The camera app showed a motion alert. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened the feed, expecting to see a raccoon or a stray cat. Instead, what she saw made her blood run cold. A tall, hunched figure stood motionless in front of her living room window, shrouded in darkness. No face was visible, just a black silhouette, its outline distorted like a shadow stretched too far. In its right hand, it held something that caught the moonlight, glinting with a sharp metallic sheen, possibly a knife. The figure didn't move, didn't sway, just stood there with an unnatural stillness, as if it was staring into the house, waiting. Carla's breath caught in her throat. She lay frozen in bed, her fingers trembling as she gripped the phone. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the heater, but then she heard it. A soft, deliberate scratching sound against the window pane, like someone dragging a blade across the glass with agonizing slowness. The sound was rhythmic, almost taunting, as if the figure wanted her to know it was there. Her mind raced with horrifying possibilities, an intruder breaking in, creeping toward Lily's room, or worse, something not entirely human standing just outside. She glanced at the baby monitor on her nightstand, confirming Lily was still asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling. But the thought of that figure so close to her daughter made Carla's chest tighten with panic. She forced herself to keep watching the screen, hoping the figure would leave. But it remained motionless, its presence filling her with dread. Then, as if sensing her gaze, it moved. Slowly, almost mechanically, it raised its free hand, its fingers unnaturally long and thin, and pointed directly at the camera. The gesture was deliberate, as if it knew she was watching, as if it was challenging her to act. Carla's heart pounded so loudly she thought it might wake Lily. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body felt heavy, like the air itself was pressing her down. Suddenly, the footage flickered and cut to static, leaving her staring at a blank screen. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by her ragged breathing. She waited, listening for any sound, a footstep, a creak, anything, but the house remained still. Hours passed before she dared to move. When dawn finally broke, Carla crept to the backyard, her phone clutched tightly in case she needed to call for help. What she found made her stumble backward. A kitchen knife with a worn wooden handle was stabbed deep into the soil, exactly where the figure had stood. It wasn't hers. She didn't even own a knife like that. She called the police, her voice shaking as she described the footage and the knife. They searched the property but found no footprints, no signs of forced entry, nothing to explain the figure or the knife. A neighbor, an older woman who'd lived in the town for decades, overheard Carla talking to the officers and pulled her aside. She spoke in a hushed tone about a man who used to roam the neighborhood years ago, always at night, always carrying a blade. He'd vanished after a string of unsolved incidents, and some locals swore they still saw his shadow on moonlit nights. Carla never felt safe in that house again and moved out within a month, haunted by the image of that figure pointing at her through the camera. Diego, a 21-year-old college student living in Boise, Idaho in 2024. To cover his tuition, he worked the night shift at a local supermarket, restocking shelves and cleaning aisles. The job was repetitive, but Diego enjoyed the solitude of the store at midnight, when the only sounds were the hum of the freezers and the occasional footsteps of a late-night shopper. The store was a sprawling older building with dim corners and lights that flickered when the power surged. Diego had grown used to its quirks, but one night, that familiar quiet turned into something deeply unsettling. It was just before midnight, and Diego was in aisle 7, stacking cereal boxes under the harsh glow of fluorescent lights. The store was nearly empty. He'd seen one customer earlier, a man in a baseball cap browsing the drink aisle, but no one else had come through. As he arranged the boxes, a strange sound broke the silence, a sharp, metallic scraping, like someone dragging a knife slowly across the metal shelves on the other side of the aisle. The sound was deliberate, almost rhythmic, as if whoever was making it wanted to draw attention. Diego froze, a box of cornflakes in his hand, and called out, "Hey, who's there? Mike, is that you?" He thought it might be his coworker playing a prank, but the silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint buzz of the lights. The scraping stopped, but then a new sound emerged, slow, heavy footsteps like someone in thick boots walking deliberately toward him from the far end of the aisle. Each step echoed in the empty store, growing closer, louder. Diego's stomach churned. He grabbed the flashlight from his belt, a habit from working late nights, and shone it down the aisle. The beam cut through the dimness, revealing nothing but rows of cereal boxes and a lone shopping cart abandoned in the distance. The footsteps stopped, but the air felt thicker, like someone was standing just out of sight, watching him. Diego's unease grew. He pulled out his phone and opened the employee app that let him access the store's security cameras. He selected the feed for aisle 7, expecting to see an empty aisle or maybe a stray customer. Instead, his breath caught in his throat. The camera showed a hooded figure standing directly behind him, no more than a foot away, its face obscured by shadow. In its hand was something sharp, glinting under the fluorescent lights. A knife maybe, or something worse. Diego spun around, his heart pounding, but the aisle was empty. No one was there. His flashlight swept the area, revealing nothing but shelves and the faint flicker of the overhead lights. His hands shook as he looked back at his phone. The figure was still there on the screen, standing motionless, its head tilted slightly as if studying him. Diego's legs felt weak, but he forced himself to move, stumbling over a box he'd dropped in his panic. He ran toward the front of the store, his footsteps echoing in the silence, expecting to hear the heavy boots chasing him. When he reached the manager's office, he locked the door and pulled up the footage again. The figure was gone, vanishing in a flicker of static, as if it had never existed. The next morning, Diego and his manager reviewed the footage together. The hooded figure appeared for only a few seconds before disappearing, and no other cameras in the store showed anyone entering or leaving aisle 7. But when they checked the shelves, they found deep, jagged scratch marks etched into the metal, as if someone had carved them with a blade. The marks weren't there during Diego's last shift, and no one on the staff admitted to making them. Diego quit that same week, unable to shake the feeling that whatever he saw on that camera was still watching him, waiting for him to return to the empty aisles. Valeria, a 25-year-old woman living alone in an apartment in Savannah, Georgia, in 2022. She had recently moved into an old building in the historic district, a place with exposed brick walls, creaky wooden floors, and a faint musty smell that lingered in the air. The apartment was charming but eerie, especially at night when the sounds of the city faded, leaving only the groans of the old structure. To ease her nerves about living alone, Valeria bought a cheap security camera and installed it in the hallway connecting her living room to her bedroom. The camera, linked to an app on her phone, let her check her apartment from anywhere, giving her a sense of control. But one night, that control vanished. Valeria woke at 3:33 a.m. to a distinct creaking sound, like someone stepping carefully on the wooden floor in her hallway. At first, she dismissed it as the building settling. Old places like hers made all sorts of noises. But the creaking continued, slow and rhythmic, each step deliberate as if someone were trying not to be heard. Her heart began to race, a cold sweat breaking out on her skin. She reached for her phone, her fingers fumbling in the dark, and opened the camera app. What she saw made her breath catch. Her bedroom door, which she always locked before bed, was slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of pitch-black darkness beyond. As she stared at the screen, the door began to move, opening inch by inch with agonizing slowness, as if someone or something was pushing it with deliberate care. The movement was so calculated it felt intentional, like whoever was on the other side wanted her to feel every second of dread. Valeria's hands shook as she reached for the kitchen knife she kept in her nightstand, a precaution she'd taken since moving in. Her voice trembled as she shouted, "Who's there? Get out of my house!" The words echoed in the silent apartment, but there was no response. The door paused, hanging in that unsettling, half-open state, as if her voice had frozen whatever was behind it. In the footage, a long, distorted shadow stretched across the hallway floor, shifting slightly as if someone were standing just out of frame, swaying back and forth. The sight sent a chill down Valeria's spine. The air in her room felt colder, heavier, like an invisible presence was pressing in around her. Her eyes darted between the phone and the door, expecting to see it swing open at any moment. Then the camera caught a brief, terrifying glint, something metallic, maybe a knife reflecting the dim light of the hallway, before the door slammed shut with a deafening bang that shook the walls. Valeria screamed, clutching the knife to her chest, her mind racing with images of an intruder lurking just outside her room. She called the police, her voice barely coherent as she explained what she'd seen. When they arrived, they searched every inch of the apartment, checking windows, doors, and closets, but found no signs of a break-in. Everything was locked tight, and there were no footprints or marks to suggest anyone had been there. But when they reviewed the footage with Valeria, they noticed something chilling. The shadow in the hallway didn't match any object in the apartment. It wasn't cast by furniture, lamps, or anything else they could identify. It was as if something had been standing there, but it didn't belong to the physical world. The officers left, unable to offer an explanation, and Valeria spent the rest of the night sitting up, the knife in her hand, watching the camera feed. She moved out a week later, unable to spend another night in that apartment. The landlord later told her that previous tenants had reported strange noises and shadows in the hallway, but no one had ever stayed long enough to investigate. Valeria still has nightmares about that door opening slowly in the dark, the sound of those deliberate footsteps and the shadow that seemed to know she was watching.